I don't think all of it's going to fit. Like, I don't think you're going to be able, maybe you can read that. So there's the whole thing. Maybe I can compress it a little bit. There, without getting too messy. There's the whole code. Let's review. We start in main. We're going to take in our input as a string, even though we want a number. We're going to provide an integer to store the real number. We're going to have a bool that's going to see if our validation function returns true or false. Or it's going to store what is returned by our validation function. All right, we're going to pose this question inside of a do loop so that it will happen at least once. We're going to get our input. We're going to set our bool based on what is returned by that function. So at this point, our program goes up here to our function. Let's see what this does. Function takes in a string, returns a bool. We have a for loop that's going to scan the entire string. And we are going to call isDigit on each character in that string. If at any point it finds out that one of those characters is not a digit, it's going to print that out to the user, say it's not a digit, return false. We come down here and return false. That means, a false with an exclamation point in front of it is a true. If the loop is true, it runs again. We prompt them again for another number. Now, if this for loop makes it through the entire string and everything does check out to be a digit, we're going to return true, and then true flipped is false. The loop breaks. We convert that number to something we can do math with, and we do our math. So any questions about how that works? We have some other conversion functions, and we have some other check functions. Right here we're using isDigit. If you were wanting to check for a letter, we would use isAlpha. IsAlpha will return a 2 if it's a capital and a 1 if it's a lowercase, I believe. I may have that backwards. But either case, both of those are true values. It will return a 0 if it is not an alphabetical letter. So if you put in a semicolon or you put in a number, this will return a 0. Anything other than a letter will return a 0. Another one you have is alphanumeric. And basically this is the same as saying isDigit isDigit or isAlpha. So if you were to combine those two functions, you would have isAlphanumeric. And basically this weeds out your exclamation point, your dollar signs, your other characters that are not letters or numbers. And then we have some other conversion functions. Down here we're using string to integer. You can also run string to float. This will take in some float. This takes in a string and returns a float. So you could do that and get a float back. Do you have a question? All right, let me wrap this up and I'll come check that. We have string to digit, or sorry, double. So this would take in a really big float and return a double. And we have string to integer, and there's another string to float written that way, but it's basically the same as this one. So there are your conversion functions. So I'm going to scrap this. I'm going to scrap that. And let's get a name variable in here. Hey guys, when I'm lecturing, one of my biggest pet peeves is for you guys to be talking. I don't want to have to talk over you. We want to validate a name. We're going to say enter name. We can do cn name. And we're going to change this function up here. Let's just call it isName, or is. Yeah, we'll just do isName. Change num to name. We're still going to have to validate all of the characters, so I'll leave my for loop here. And we're checking for a letter. Right? We don't want numbers showing up in our name, and we don't want special characters showing up in a name. So we're going to use isAlpha. Change my sentence to say this is not a letter. Change my function to name. All right, so if you want to look at that, we basically changed our string to name in both places, and we're using isAlpha now. We're not doing any conversions. We just want to know, is this a valid name? And if it is a valid name, we'll have some welcome message. But if it's not valid, it should circulate and ask again. Let's try that. So if I put in a 3, found character 3 is not a number. Let's say so it's going to pull out those characters that are not letters and ask us for the name until we enter an actual valid name, or at least a set of characters. And then it says welcome to the system. So that works. But what if I want to enter my full name?
Or not convert to a string.
Somebody said it. Get line. CN doesn't work. CN will only take in the first one, and when it sees that space, it's going to cut the rest of that off. So we'll switch from CN to get line. And get line will take in the source which is cn, and the variable, which is name. Is this going to work? Let's try it. What does that mean?
Space. You have to make a exception for spaces.
All right, so space is not a letter. It's going to kick it out because of the space. How do we deal with that?
Change it to alphanumeric.
Well, then they can put numbers in their name. I don't want that.
Or not space.
He says, or not a space. We put it here.
Yeah.
It says, or not a space. Actually, it needs to be name sub I, not equal to space. How do I do a space?
Double quotes with scalable.
Single quotes. If it's a single character, we use single quotes. Another thing we can do, 32. I'm still not sure this is correct, but 32 also represents a space. Why is that? Is everyone familiar with the ASCII table? No? So every character has a numeric value attached to it because the computer only speaks digits anyways. It only speaks ones and zeros, and those are all numbers. So there is a table where every character has a corresponding numeric value. This is an ugly one. Let's find a pretty one.
That's not gonna work. I think it should be.
No, it needs to be.
The order should be.
I think it needs to be is equal.
So right here it says space is decimal number 32. So we could use that. We could use number 32. If you were looking for that @ symbol, you would check out number 64. If you want to use numbers, but you can also put it in single quotes if you can type it. But the ASCII table gives you some values that you can't type, or that are more difficult to type, like a half. Anyways, that's probably the most intuitive way to do it. Put a space in there in single quotes. And is this going to work?
This does not work.
Let's try it. Let's just run it, and we'll put in. What is that?
Because it's looking for a choice, either or, so it comes back with false.
So what do we need to do to fix this?
And
Yeah.
Okay.
And.
Yeah.
So
It's not.
it needs to be a letter, and it can also be a space. So that works. Any questions on validating a name?
what if you need a hyphen?
You need a hyphen? So we need
No,
to.
just because there's names with like hyphens or exclamation points or stuff like that.
So can we just say name sub I is not a hyphen? That works. Good call. All right, if there are no other questions, we'll go over the lab.
I have a quick general question. I noticed you're not using the return zero. Is that not required?
For main?
Yeah, at the end of main.
In Visual Studio, it's not required. I don't know if y'all know this, but Visual Studio does not run real C++. It runs Visual C++.
Right.
And it does not follow the community standard, I guess, completely. It's about 98% there. And there are things you can do in real C++ that you can't do here, and then you can bend the rules a little bit here where you can't in real C++. Yeah, in real C++, you need to return 0 there. You may also see it done this way. Void main, that works just fine, and then you don't need a return statement. And in some, you may see something like you might see it written that way. They'll want to see if you're passing in any arguments, and then your array of arguments coming in from the command line. Have you ever typed in something from the command line where it's more than just the program name, and you'll put in like a dash, I don't know. In video games, sometimes you'll have like, you can do like dash Vulkan or something like that to switch your graphics API, or debug, we'll run it in debug mode, things like that. You can pass arguments into your program from the command line, and those will come in right here. But you may see this written different ways, but to answer your question, no, you don't have to have the return statement, even though technically I should.
So if we don't put it in during tests or anything, will we lose points?
I will never even notice. It doesn't do anything. I mean, it's cute to think that the whole world hinges on that, but it doesn't. Obviously, it runs just fine without it. And the system doesn't really care if you return a 0 or not. Any other questions? All right, let's look at the lab. You're going to write a program that prompts the user for this information. You're going to format it in a specific way. You're going to create a class that's going to store all of this information. You're going to call that the user class. You're going to use separate header file and source file, so you'll need your main source file, your header for your user, and your CPP for your user. You're going to write member functions to validate each one of these fields. And then you're going to have a getInfo function that you're going to call from main against your class variables, against your objects. Keep your variables private variables, public functions. You're going to create an array of 3 of these objects. You're going to call getInfo, and getInfo is going to prompt for all of these guys. It's going to validate that input. And then when you're done, it would just be done. You're not doing anything with the information after that. There's an example here, basically like what I've just shown you, and then like I went over on Monday, make sure your name appears on that project file. I take off 10 points if the name is missing. Make sure you clean this guy up before you turn it in. You need to delete that debug folder and those database files, and the only thing left in that .bs folder should be those subfolders containing the .suo. Take off 10 points if you mess this up. You're going to zip the project and submit it to Moodle. Should be on the order of about 8 to 10 kilobytes. And if you turn in a project that does not even compile, I'll probably just give you a 0. On a test, I'm a little more lenient with that. You know, if you can't get the thing to run and you can't figure out what to comment out for best case, I'm a little more lenient on tests. But for labs, you've got plenty of time to ask for help and to get this guy working. So if you turn in something that will not even compile, I'll probably just give you a 0. Any questions on the lab? You've already got a pretty good start on it. You need to ship this over to a class. And then some of these guys, you're going to be required to use some of those functions I went over to validate things. Birthday is going to have a certain length. Certain special characters need to show up in there. Same thing with the email address. The length is variable on the email address, but you do need that @ symbol and that dot something. And when I check these, I'm going to try to break them. I'm going to do my best to break this stuff. So validate it to the best of your abilities.
So like phone number, we need to check for hyphen, stuff like that.
Yeah.